Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from Fed Insider, and on behalf of the George Washington University College of Professional Studies, Carasoft and Lookout, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, The Modern Endpoint, It's Personal. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod on the left side of your screen. If we don't get to your questions today, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Resources tab to download today's slides. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or Cart tab located above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available for download in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all polling questions and stay online for the duration of today's hour-long conversation. Now, let me turn over to today's moderator, Jane Norris from Fed Insider. Take it away, Jane.
Thanks so much, Claudia. It's great to see you and everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is a really interesting conversation and one that I am very personally interested in. And obviously, you are too, since you're turned in today. And that's the mobile threat that we all face by using our handheld devices. Today's workforce, as you all know, isn't tethered to laptops. It's powered by mobile. It's often the primary way that employees connect to email and other mission-critical resources, but it's not treated that way from a security standpoint. Traditional mobile device management solutions weren't built to detect advanced threats or align with zero trust principles. They offer basic control, but not the telemetry, risk context, or threat detection required by today's federal cybersecurity standards. Meanwhile, the modern kill chain pathway begins with reconnaissance. Attackers learn all they can about their target agency and its employees, primarily through social media, including whether they use a single sign-on page. These malicious actors capitalize on the commoditization of advanced malware and ready available malware as a service kits that make creating these codes an easy task for attackers. One company reports that 60% of mobile devices run on vulnerable operating systems. So in our session today, government and industry leaders will explore why legacy mobile management tools are no longer enough and how agencies can meet federal requirements by extending modern security to the mobile endpoint. So before we get into this fascinating discussion, let's meet our experts today. Joining us is Jonathan Fibus. Jonathan is the Acting Director of the IT Services Department and Operations Division in the Office of the Chief Information Officer of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Jonathan, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to be here with you as well. Dr. Mike Henson is group leader of the Cyber Resilience Foundations Group and a senior cybersecurity engineer and researcher at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Mike, so nice to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
All right, thanks. And finally, Jim Coyle. Jim is the Chief Technology Officer for U.S. Public Sector at Lookout. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you as well.
Jane, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
All right, this is really an interesting one, and I know that the audience is very interested in this topic too. So when you get a minute, check out the Resources tab. You'll find the backgrounds and biographies for all these distinguished gentlemen there, and also a way that you can ask questions if you would like to do that. So we hope that you participate in that way. So Jonathan, I want to start with you if we can. Security is a priority, especially in a regulatory environment like the NRC, like your agency. You're responsible for regulating commercial nuclear power plants and other uses of nuclear materials. That's a big thing. So can you describe the NRC's current approach to mobile security and how it aligns with the broader zero trust requirements? Jonathan, and you're on mute. Jonathan, you're on mute.
Oops, is that
there we
better?
Go. Good job.
We have a very mobile workforce, so it's very important that they're able to get to the data and systems that they need from wherever they are with whatever system they have to connect with. So we want to make sure that between the combination of the user and their device, that they can do what they need to do with what they need. So if they're on a personal device, we want to make sure that there are some systems or some databases that they may not be able to touch. They may not be able to download information to work locally. They may have to stay connected. And that's an implementation of zero trust. We want to make sure those combinations all work together to ensure what they have access to help them get their jobs done. And also the ability to work not only from government furnished information, but from personal devices gives us some resiliency so that they can be where they need to be doing what they have and have some alternate mechanisms for getting in.
Is the agency always been in this kind of fluid, flexible mold, or has it been progressing over time, Jonathan?
It's been progressing over time. We've, as budgets and as flexibility has changed, we wanted to make sure that people gained access. So as we had better tools for managing our mobile devices and for being able to make more granular determinations in terms of zero trust, that we've been able to up our game and provide additional access based on what we've been able to see from our users.
And that was to maximize their time spent in the field versus, coming back to a laptop computer. Can you tell us a little bit about what drove that decision?
Correct. We wanted to make sure that they were able to be as productive as they are wherever they are. So having them come back to the office in order to file a report seems like a high bar to pass. And for many of the things that we do, we're filling in a template. So it's very quick for them to work from a mobile device to do that, as opposed to waiting to get to someplace with more secure access in order to gain access to a laptop, to log into a system, and to provide a heavyweight client access to what they need.
All right, that's great information. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. We'll learn more about that from you in the moments ahead. I'd like to talk to Michael next. Michael, you're a senior researcher, security engineer, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. How does PNNL define the mobile threat landscape, and what makes it uniquely challenging for you?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So the mobile threat landscape is characterized by an increasing use of bring your own device, BYOD, which I think we've heard a little bit about here previously. That's both at PNNL and in general, I think. That presents unique challenges in finding the right balance between securing the devices while allowing for, flexibility, usability. That's the age-old trade-off there. So this tends to limit the tools and policies that can be deployed on these devices, even though at the same time, they're one of the most highly targeted devices or vectors that a person will have access to. And as an example, we have MDM for our operational bring your own devices at PNNL, but not an endpoint detection response tool at this time. And that's a decision that's been made to kind of balance the usability, and the privacy versus security. So to add to this complexity, the way that people use their personal devices is different than how they typically consider and use furnished equipment. So they're much more comfortable, relaxed with their own device and might do things on them that they would never do on a company or government furnished one, right? This problem because the user still tends to be the weakest link from a security perspective. So while they're highly technical, there are highly technical attacks on smartphones, and we'll talk about those in a second. Majority of attacks happen through phishing, smishing on the smartphone, where user is actually the vector, or they click on something that they shouldn't. So those attacks, of course, are often motivated by financial gain, where some of the more complex attacks may be for political or intelligence purposes, right? Besides purposely created malicious applications, many developers make use of free SDKs that claim to allow for things like advertising and monetization of apps. That's easy for them, but it also includes oftentimes risky or malicious behavior, adware, those types of things. So add to that list, the fact that malicious apps have been added to all of the trusted app stores. They're out there. They get them out of there fairly quickly, but they're actually malicious apps inside the trusted app stores. And then on top of that, there's the ability to sideload apps, from the Wild West, especially with these devices that people are using, their personal BYOD, right? And end users have a really difficult time, trying to maintain the security health of their devices because of all that. So malicious or risky apps have been found preloaded on some devices right out of the box as well. And that's using some of our tools we'll talk about later. So, you might buy a phone off the shelf and some of the lower end models may have some of these risky or malicious apps even already preloaded on them. And then as far as sophisticated attacks, there are zero-click vulnerabilities, that can exploit Hotspot 2.0, for example, watering hole attacks, rogue radio access points, etc. And this is an area that national labs, the one I'm talking about now is an area that national labs are considering that might not be something you'll hear from most security providers, and that's supply chain consideration, right? So about 4 out of every 5 smartphones is actually, is in use in the United States, has actually been built outside of the United States. And that makes it more difficult to vet those components of the smartphone ecosystem. And the last thing I'll say about that is, because I know it's stand on the soapbox, that's kind of our overarching view, but we learned a long time ago that attempting to bolt on or build security on top of potentially vulnerable components is not always a great idea. So that's where the supply chain piece comes in.
So the analysis of this kind of telemetry and all of that data, is that assigned to AI, or how do you get your arms around that?
Yeah, I think we'll talk a little bit about that later on, but AI and ML are great tools that can be used to help in this fight. Of course, they're also being used by the adversaries as well. So it's kind of this race to see who can actually use the AI, the best and the quickest, right? So, the AI is being used to actually make phishing attacks seem more real, like they're coming from a real person, and then we're trying to use AI also to identify those types of attacks as well. But
Yeah, you're talking about individuals that are being targeted. So it's interesting, Jim, when we did our pre-brief, you talked a little about this. How has the threat landscape changed? For instance, threat actors are now leveraging social media to launch phishing campaigns, as Michael just mentioned, against individuals in the public sector. And there are examples of that, happening even today with high-ranking officials within the federal government being imitated by AI. So talk a little about that.
Yeah, and let's even get off on that last one here, because I know the FBI just a couple of weeks ago put out a notice about threat actors are pretending to be U.S. government officials. They're targeting other folks in the government. This is a one-on-one attack method, right? And as Michael had just mentioned, humans are kind of that weakest element, and traditionally they always have, and that's why phishing has been so important in terms of training and education and trying to spot the fish, right? From a mobile perspective, it gets a little bit harder, because now we're talking about, you don't have the ability to hover a mouse pointer over a link to see where does this go. It actually requires either trying to decipher the link yourself, or actually tapping on that link, trying to copy it, pasting it somewhere else, or going to a tool to see, hey, what's really behind this URL? And it causes an extra step. For an everyday user, we can't expect them to know about these other tools that are out there. And they may, depending on how good that lore is, go ahead and tap that message. And it could be a drive-by website, which, provides some kind of mobile malware. It could be utilizing exploitation capabilities, whether it's in operating system, it could be in a specific application. But the goal or the purpose would be to ultimately get malware onto that mobile device. The other avenue here is it could be a lure to get credentials. And this is something that we're starting to see when we talk about groups like Scattered Spider, who's now resurfacing. There's been Octopus and Lapsus, and they're all very closely related in their various activities in the groups that they work with. But more importantly, their TTPs, or how they go and attack mobile devices. And their primary goal is to go after getting username and passwords, getting the MFA token, because since COVID, the majority of folks are now pushing MFA tokens to mobile devices. It was a quick and easy way to get multi-factor authentication deployed and out there to get remote workforce capability. But when we start talking about these threat actors, they're following where the activity is. And so as users become more modernized and they're starting to use these devices, like today, I'm talking to you on a tablet. I can do 90% of my job from a mobile device, no matter where I am in the world. And so when we start to see these more modern approaches throughout government, throughout public sector overall, throughout even, in the commercial sector, the attackers are going to be following suit. And so now we've got all of these various different kind of phishing capabilities that are out there, making it very difficult for users to kind of decipher. It's now time to start talking about how do we bring technology to the mix to help them, because not everybody is, a security professional. Not everybody is an IT administrator and knows exactly what to do in those, points in time. Now, the other thing that's been happening and is super interesting to follow from a cyber perspective, we saw Salt Typhoon, successfully breach multiple telephone carriers, getting access into, cell phones. We saw some political, individuals here in the U.S. who unfortunately had some of their information leaked. That's what these, threat actors are really out there to do. But the important piece here is now we're starting to see, nation states, not just the folks that are going after money, but now we're starting to see nation states specifically target U.S. government officials, U.S. government, enterprise environments through mobile attacks. Now, whether that's, attacking the carriers and going into the back door. But the important piece here is the government put out a notification that said, hey, don't trust your cell phones. Don't have sensitive conversations on the phone or through text message. Go use an encrypted system like Signal or WhatsApp. That just told the attackers, hey, we're going to have sensitive conversations on these applications. And we have been seeing vulnerabilities getting used where attackers are targeting these vulnerabilities, weaponizing these platforms and these applications to get access to those mobile devices. So again, it's just the trend of attackers are following suit. But the important piece to know here is it's a mobile device. It's the identity of an individual, whether a government employee, somebody who's just at home, going through college, whatever the case is. Cell phone is the identity of an individual that could be linked to enterprise organizations, to sensitive information, and that's the gold mine today.
But what you say is the attackers are following the trend. So if there's any information out there that indicates go to this other, application and use that because it's safer, obviously they're looking at those trend lines too, and they can follow you there. So that's sobering. I'll just put it I'll put it that way. Thanks very much, Jim. Appreciate that. Jonathan, back to you. With your mobile workforce, how do you address bandwidth security challenges when your people are using mobile devices in the field? Many of them are in remote locations. So how does that exactly work? And what have you done to make sure the security is in place for that?
So we've been putting a lot of our communications on VPN links. But as we've been making our zero trust journey, we're trying to get away from VPNs. So we're looking at nations so that authentication decisions, and we're just trying to make use of those as often as we can and making sure that users are authenticating the link between themselves, their device, and what information they're reaching in our boundaries.
Okay. And any satellite communications? I mean, have you graduated to anything that, but might be a little more sophisticated and futuristic, or are you looking at that?
We are looking at that. Right now, cost is keeping us away from a lot of that. We're trying to figure out the use cases that would make us want to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And, right now we're trying to stick with Wi-Fi and with cellular communications as much as we can.
Okay. I know that I live part of my year in near Cape Canaveral, so I see the rocket launches going up just about every day. And I know that Starlink system must be really built out by now. But thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Michael, can we talk a little bit about the TVIP tool that PNNL actually developed, and it might even be in commercial use soon. It's a best of my description, and you can give me yours. The device integrity validation tool developed by you that detects software, firmware, and hardware modifications to a smartphone between 2 points in time.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jane. So that was a really great description of it. So it's called the Traveler Verified Integrity Protection tool, and it was developed at PNNL over the past 9 years with funding and direction first from DHS S&T and then later on CISA. And as a note, PNNL is now seeking interested industry partners for potential transition of the tool. So we're finished with all the testing and the rollout and all those types of things. The tool provides a very user-friendly way for evaluating the potential risk for both iPhone and Android devices. And it's been used by various government agencies over the past several years. As an example, they plug in the device, it basically scans for all the settings, all the installed applications, etc. And it can identify, it's got a ready-made list of sort of risky apps and apps that might have been built with risky SDKs, as we already spoke about earlier. And so it gives you sort of a score based upon that, but it's also adjustable by the user. So they can set that paranoia score, if you will, up or down a little bit, saying we want to be more paranoid, we want to be less paranoid. There's, you can actually adjust it to say, we're okay with this particular app, even though we know there's a little risk, we want to accept that one, or we want to add additional apps, that we want to basically, classify as risky. And on top of that, it does things like look for, lax policies on the phone, also looks for things like jailbroken or rooted devices. And so it can, like I said, it can identify risk just in a static way, but the real use of it and the way that it's been targeted for use is, as you say, between 2 points in time. So it's used by, for example, the State Department in the past for people who are traveling overseas or to risky locations, right? So they'll take a snapshot of that phone before they go, another, snapshot as soon as they get back, compare those two things to see if anything has changed. And, if there are changes specifically to, applications or settings, things of that nature that the individual did not change themselves, then, there'd be a further analysis that would be required. And that might be really important to kind of inform other travelers who are going to that part of the country that there might be some sort of risk or something. So.
Wow. So you're primarily looking for the changes that have taken place. So this is generally meant to identify, so you cannot use or they cannot see what you are typing into your mobile phone. I mean, how would it work in practical application?
Yeah. So as an example, when I spoke earlier about some devices actually come with preloaded sort of malicious apps, TBIP was the tool that was actually used to catch that as one example. So a phone was taken right out of the box and scanned and actually identified there were some risky apps already installed on the phone. That usually comes with sort of the lower end vendors of phones that do that. But in another way, as I say, you plug the phone in, run a scan on it before you actually take a trip over to country X, wherever that happens to be, or some location that you feel is a little riskier. And then you get back and you scan that same device and it will actually produce a list of any changes and also give you a score that tells you like, we think this is a risky change. Like there are things that are more significant that could have changed than other things, right? And so it gives you an easy to understand and digest risk score that you can actually dive into and determine what actually changed. Based upon that, you kind of make a determination of whether you want to go to a forensics team or not. So we need to actually look further into this. That can produce intelligence reports that then helps to inform future travelers, right? And say, when you go into this country, you may not want to have that app installed because it seems like it may be something people are targeting, that type of thing.
Is that common? I mean, is it common that traveling professionals would have that kind of malware put on their phones?
I think that phones are definitely targeted when you're traveling overseas to different locations. And I think there was even some advice at one point, that people should take burner phones, like, government officials should take burner phones when they're traveling to particular locations and things. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's incredible. Well, good luck with that. Please keep us posted about the commercial partner. All right. Maybe someone listening today may contact you about that. Thanks, Michael. So Jim, according to a recent Lookout blog, threat actors are exploiting the mobile edge to compromise organizations because security teams don't necessarily have insight into everyday mobile devices, especially at the edge. So is this a common vulnerability, and are government agencies maybe overlooking this one?
Absolutely. And in fact, when we kind of talk about mobile security, most folks immediately kind of think of MDM or mobile device management. And MDMs are good at what they do. They're policy control. They say something like, we'll use the TikTok, ban as an example. Government says thou shall not have TikTok on government phones. MDMs, you remove TikTok from those mobile devices and you prevent them from being downloaded. And that's what they do. However, when you allow certain applications, who is doing the investigation work on those applications? And what I mean by that is who's doing the reverse engineering, following the developer, following the SDKs that were used in these applications. This is where, beyond the malicious capabilities, but this is where MDMs kind of leave the security aspect, right, in the policy world. And that's where we come in from an MTD or a mobile threat defense capability. We're looking at applications on a regular basis, every single day. Excuse me. And so, just as an example, we just found an application that had been downloaded over 90,000 times. It was on Google Play. Nothing was malicious about it. It allowed you to read PDF files through, a mobile application. However, once the developer had enough downloads, they then weaponized it. Malicious code was inserted. Now you've got 90,000, people who have a malicious app on their device. And now the attacker has, the access rights that were originally granted when the user downloaded the app. If you're not paying attention to the developer, the SDK, and constantly looking at the code of the app, these are things that you can miss. And so, it's a great avenue for attackers, and it makes it that much more harder for mobile defenders, because now you're talking about, well, if I'm not doing this research, is this a risk I'm willing to take? Or do I offload this risk, right? And that's where we can kind of step in. But that's not just the only avenue. We're also talking about things like, rogue networks. I believe Michael mentioned that earlier. When we talk about, connecting to a hotel Wi-Fi, how do you know if somebody's not sniffing the network and has the ability to connect to your device? What about Bluetooth, right? Our company was founded originally by raising awareness on Bluetooth vulnerabilities, and that's kind of where we got our start. There's tons of avenues where attackers are using that mobile device as that first initial entry point. Again, just to kind of talk about Scattered Spider for a brief moment, they have been so successful. They have, gotten millions of dollars out of organizations globally by going after that mobile piece first. Now, sometimes this includes, and this is where Scattered Spider is getting their success, using English-speaking people and making phone calls and using a form of, forgive me for expanding upon the phishing world, but vishing or voice phishing in order to get people to do what they want. And because you're calling an organization that may be US based with an English speaker, there's automatically some kind of authority that is giving the attackers, because you don't have that red flag that says, okay, this is somebody in a different country that I may not have that immediate trust in. And they like to talk in circles very quickly just to try to get you to do things. And they may be doing their homework and they may say, hey, this is Sam from the IT department. We noticed some, bad logons. We reset your password. Let's make sure you can still log in, right? And that's the lore. And maybe you have a Sam in your IT department. So these are kind of things that they typically use. On the outside of this, when you start talking about more in the physical space, SIM swap attacks. Now, this is really difficult to detect. In fact, this is really on the carrier side of the networks, but duplicating SIMs in order to ultimately clone your phone or at least create a digital representation of your device. And so when an MFA token is pushed to your device, instead of it going to yours, it now goes to them. And that's another very successful avenue. So yeah, Is it common for these types of attacks? Absolutely. As far as that we can see from our data, yeah, there's a lot of commonality these days with mobile attacks.
I guess the only question I would have about all that, and that's a scary rendition, are users meant to be conscious of all of this, or should this be done as a back-end function that automatically protects the mobile device?
Yeah, great question. And honestly, I think it's a little bit of both, right? As we move more into the modern world, these mobile devices are so important into everyone's lives. I mean, if you think about what happens if you lost your phone, your photos, right? Now, yes, there's iCloud backups, right, for iPhone, and Google has their cloud backup situations, but what if that wasn't working, or you've exceeded your storage, or if for whatever reason, turned it off or haven't set it up, right? Contacts, photos, personal information that might be on there that you may not want in the hands of other individuals, your banking apps, right? Maybe some private messages that may be on there that you don't want, right? And more importantly, email. How many times when you open up your email app on your phone do you actually log in?
Mm-hmm.
Usually you hit it, boom, you're automatically logged in, right? Because that authentication happens behind the scenes. So for an attacker to have access to that could be damaging, right? Because typically email is the gold mine. It's where many people get their receipts. It's where people get, all of their shopping, coupons and, other personal settings, right, are all kind of sent to their personal email. That's the gold mine. Because now I can start sniffing around for other accounts, past breaches. Are you doing password reuse? And that can easily go from the personal side back to the enterprise world.
True. That's true. All right, you're scaring everybody, but thank you. It's terrific. Great information. So, Jonathan, back to you. Oh, before I get to you, Jonathan, I want to give these results from our poll. So, those of you who are watching today, we asked you, how confident are you about your organization's current security measures? 30% very confident, 49% somewhat confident, I'm not sure what that means, and 13% neutral, 5% a little concerned, and 4% very concerned. So it sounds like most people feel like the phone that they're using is fairly secure. So Jonathan, go back to you now. This is a question about how you guys at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, you have eliminated all of your legacy IT systems. So how has that helped you enable stronger mobile and endpoint security? Or has it, I guess, is the question.
So we've moved away from logging into an application or leveraging single sign-on to log into an application, and we're doing more policy enforcement. So the applications and the policy engines along the network become smarter about who's using the app, what the data is, what device they're from, and it's able to figure out what access they should have based on who they are, where they are, and what exactly they're trying to do. And we hope to keep moving that, making those policies stronger, making those policies more granular over time. So as opposed to figuring out that all of our users get the same access or all of our admins get the same access, we're able to make very granular decisions at the moment based on what people are trying to do. So an inspector gets one set of data that they're able to access, a senior inspector gets a different set of data. And that's what we're planning on continuing to implement as we move forward. We just need to keep making our policy.
Hey, Jonathan, I think we're having a little bit of a lag, so I'll get back to you in just a sec. Michael, if we could talk a little bit about exploiting software development kits to bypass traditional mobile management tools. This is a new trend that we're seeing in the marketplace. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think we're talking about why MDM really is no longer sufficient as well, right? And that includes these SDKs. So the idea is that, if you think about the cybersecurity framework for NIST, for example, you've got govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And MDM solutions for the protect area of the continuum in computer science, and we would call that sort of necessary but not sufficient. It's the low-hanging fruit. They help to lock the system down, make sure people have, for example, strong passwords, et cetera, but really can't account for sort of more the dynamic issues that we highlighted earlier. And that includes risky user behavior and malicious SDKs that have sort of been used otherwise in legitimate applications. So, it's very easy to find these, especially for people who are, it's easy to develop an app at very low cost of entry. So identifying an SDK that says can help you monetize, and capture some income for yourself is something that people, like to do or look at. So they'll use that SDK, but unbeknownst to them, the SDKs have actually got some sort of backdoor capability, where that's a Trojan, or whether it's just additional adware or things like that. That happens. The MDMs themselves are not able to actually identify that. If it thinks that it is a legitimate app, by all rights, it looks like it's a legitimate app. And don't forget, I've said that there are apps that have been in the actual app stores, whether that's Apple or whether that's the Android app stores, that are malicious, right? Actually have adware and other things in them. They don't usually last very long, but they show up in those places. So even in these trusted areas, if the store itself is going to trust that app, certainly people are going to install those apps. And there are, quite a few installations before these things are identified, even though they try to identify them rather quickly. And then they'll remove them from the app store, but then they show up on, secondary locations where people can still install them. So I guess my point is that if these people who are paid and they have a very high interest in identifying that those apps are legitimate and secure, it can even fool them. It's going to definitely fool MDMs and other types of things, which is why, it is important for us to look at sort of a whole solution when we look at all those things: protect, detect, respond, recover. And you need things like, detection and response on some of these devices, as opposed to just MDMs. And that's why I think we're sort of singing just a member of the choir here, because I know that Jim and others have already talked about that we need sort of endpoint detection and response as well. So.
Yeah, and so if that were to happen, how does it get recognized? How does that malware that's been built into a sort of a trusted app get identified?
Yeah, there's different companies will analyze those things, and there are tools online. I mentioned this in one of the responses to one of the questions as well, where you can actually drop an app into a system that will actually use multiple different virus scanners, in order to look at a particular app, and then it can identify. It looks like this is a bad SDK that's been used in the past, but someone has to do that initial identification. You're absolutely right. And a lot of times right now, there are some tools like AI-based tools that are kind of doing some similarity comparisons between behavior of apps to kind of identify, whether an app might be using, or an SDK within an app might be actually doing some things that it probably should be doing. But humans are still also heavily involved in that process of making the first identification that the SDK is bad. And then you've got, ways of propagating that, like removing it from the app store, adding it to these sites that identify, the app or the SDK that's been used in the app as something malicious. So,
So most of that management, though, I mean, is usually done by, another whatever organization you're dealing with, or it's not done by the individual. How does an individual know that they may have an infected app?
yeah, they'd have to be extremely educated. And so, some of us do take our apps out there and scan them ourselves, and look for those types of things, but without having some sort of solution in place, that would be extremely difficult for most individuals. I don't think most people, probably 99% of people, aren't going to be that in the know and take that much care with their devices to scan those types of things, right?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. All right. Jim, you were talking about earlier about the applications, and we had a question from the audience come in to ask, well, how do you know? Are there any apps that we need to stay away from? So if you could answer that, and then I have another follow-up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually one I personally love. We were talking about the TikTok ban, right? So this is a really interesting subject, and when you take the politics out of these level of cyber decisions, what you're left with is apps that have risky capabilities. And what I mean by that is, how much information are you providing to this app? What level of information and access are you providing this app? And what kind of information can they get from you as the individual? And kind of as the old saying goes, if it's free, you're the product. And, that's typical. However, when we take a look at all social media platforms, not just TikTok, right? They all kind of have this similar kind of business model, and they all have the same similar risks to them. You're providing, excuse me, you're providing a rich environment of data about you to these applications, and they are siphoning it up. Now, what do they do with it? That's the level of, that's a secondary level of risk that, people have to think about. Now, when we talk about apps to stay away from, any app where you're providing personal information or personal data, you should probably stay away from. The reality of mobile applications today is, when we first started digging into TikTok and doing our analysis on it to really kind of identify what is that level of risk, we identified well over 9 million other apps that connect back to China. So if you're a government employee, probably should not have any of those 9 million apps. But also take a look at, some of the other apps that are connecting back to, say, North Korea or Russia, right? Or other countries, period. What kind of data are they taking? Why is it going into these other countries? And are they encrypting the data? Some people may know this information, some people, may not. But again, this is why research of these applications is super important, because if you're not looking into them, and you're not looking into the developer, and you're not looking at, some of the wider research that's done by, not just us, there's tons of other, folks that are out there, doing mobile-based research, but getting an understanding of the risks associated with the data sources that you're providing, the level of access you're granting these applications, this is kind of the crux. And honestly, it's probably going to be a culture shift in order to fully understand that.
So my follow-up, I think, is pretty obvious to everybody. I think I know the answer. Then our legacy mobile device management tools, MDMs, that you've been talking about for federal agencies, do they need to be changed?
I don't think they need to be changed, but what I do think, and CIS has done a really good job at this, mandating that not only do you need MDM, but you also need an MTD. Again, that's that mobile threat defense. Having that mandated is basically saying, hey, you need some kind of advanced, malware capability, some kind of advanced anti-phishing capability on top of the policy decisions that you make as an organization. Great first move. Not everybody in the government is there yet. And I think, that's where we really kind of need to make that shift happen. But then again, when you start looking at some of the more commercial entities that are out there, they too haven't really made that shift. Sometimes it's an education moment of, I have an MDM and, operating systems are locked down. I'm good. But, a lot of times, again, education. What about from a network attack perspective? What about an application attack perspective? There's a lot of various different avenues that really need to be looked at from a defensive posture. From a lookout standpoint, we can provide the vulnerability analysis. You can actually have and incorporate our information into your vulnerability management processes today. Updating applications, updating your operating system, understanding the vulnerabilities that are out there, deciding, is this a level of risk that I'm comfortable with? Having both is honestly it just makes sense, right? It's like, in the olden days, you had to have a firewall. Then you had to have, you have to have AV on your desktop, right? You have to have all these other components. It just makes sense. And again, culturally, I think once more people start to modernize and they start to understand the threats that are out there and they understand the risks that are associated with that, we'll start to see that shift and that hard requirement of, hey, you shouldn't just have an MDM, you need an MTD as well to ensure that that defense is there.
Right, great. I'd love to ask you whether that means there's new hardware that's needed in addition to the software, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Jonathan, I wanted to talk with you about you bring your own device policy since you are mostly mobile at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Have you evolved those policies to meet, modern security demands that we're talking about?
Very much so. It was very important early on to tell people they needed a specific version of Android or iOS. It was important to tell them that they needed to do their monthly patches. Now we're getting into looking at the applications that are on the device and tell people that they need to be looking at the applications that they've got and what services are they using and should be using those services. So it's a combination of having them take some agency and ownership of what's on their phone, educating our users and pointing out things that are risky in terms of specific applications or in terms of specific permissions that an application may want. So these are things I don't want to own their phone. I want to walk a line between telling them what's a good practice and telling them what they can't do. But there are times when I have to tell someone, hey, your phone is no longer being updated. It's time for you to think about getting a new one, or we're going to have to cut off your access.
Okay. And do you think that this is working for you? I mean, do you think the new policies will evolve even further as new issues develop?
Most definitely. It's going to be a continual whack-a-mole. We are just looking for what new threats are coming up, what new changes are coming to applications, how attacks are evolving, and how we can best protect our users and our data. So I don't see it stopping. It's going to continue moving forward. And my guess is in the next 6 to 12 months, we'll have a different program from where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Right, really interesting. And Michael, from your perspective, how does the erosion of perimeter-based security challenge conventional cybersecurity models? We're seeing, a complete shift, I think, listening to Jim and Jonathan both in the way people work, where they work from, and the security of their system. So how has that shifted things, and what really needs to be changed in order to make cybersecurity models work more effectively?
Thank you. So the traditional walled garden approach to security with a defined perimeter, closely controlled ingress egress has been eroding, I think, for many years. And this movement of resources outside of that defined perimeter means that the IT function of a company or agency is not really in control of the equipment, settings, networks, environment where devices are actually being used. For a company or government furnished equipment, that can be, I think, partially mitigated by additional hardening of the device. So include, mandatory policies, enforced VPN, firewall use, endpoint detection that we've already spoken about here a little bit. But as mentioned earlier, that becomes a lot more difficult, in my opinion, with the increasing use of bring your own devices. So in these cases, users have more of an expectation of, privacy and usability, which I think by default means limiting the control and invasiveness of any security tools and policies enforced on the devices. So that friction between those goals is one of the most challenging aspects, I believe, of the erosion of the perimeter-based security. It's not just that devices are outside the wall now, but they're also personal devices that we can't lock down or control in the same sort of heavy-handed way that we might be able to do with company or government furnished equipment. So on top of that, these devices are being exposed to vulnerable environments, not only at home, but coffee shops, wherever people take them. And that mobility itself, I think, can mean your device could potentially be used as a vector for spreading malware and other things. If you think about it, when we talk about collecting information, if you have a compromised device and you're taking that around to work environments, it could be scanning those networks you're taking to other environments. It's actually moving that around and doing some of the work for the malware. So.
Well, we don't necessarily want to do the work for the malware because it's doing enough work on its own. So does this limit, let me just say, creativity, or does it limit functionality? Are there aspects of putting safeguards on phones in the cybersecurity realm that would be an impediment to, acting creatively or responding, in real time.
Yeah, I think as I said, I really think this is and I would guess that Jim has got a lot of thoughts in this area because there are people who are resistant to these ideas. It's always a trade-off between security and usability. And that is really heavily felt in this area for these mobile devices because of the fact that I think something like 80% of all companies now have bring your own devices, and even the government, something like 40-50%. So the more and more that we allow these personal devices to be used, the more that we're going to have to fight this battle between security and usability. So you have to come up with creative ways, to solve the problem in order to allow people, some of that flexibility. And I think some of the things I've seen along these lines include ideas like partitioning a phone. So you may have a secure section on a phone that can be used, and that's where sensitive information is kept for your job, and that's done through MDMs and other things. And then the other section of the phone is not really secured or locked down, so you can use that for personal use. But we find that when you do those types of things, that's where the vulnerability is in that personal section. So it's still all on the same device, and they may find a way to get into that other section. So.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Jim, did you have a comment on that, usability versus security?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to start and just say not every MTD is created the same, right? Every vendor has their own approach. So what I'm about to say is the lookout approach. This is how we approach this particular subject. And in my past, 4 years at being here, this is absolutely an organizational culture problem, because when we start talking about security, usability, and privacy, how do you accomplish all of that, right? And so for us, we take the privacy approach. So we are kind of really excel in those BYO environments because we're not an MDM. We're not, going to be able to provide, a way to remote wipe. We're not looking at your contacts, right? We're not looking at your photos. We don't get that access. And so for us, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we are intercepting, various bits of traffic. We're understanding what's happening on the operating system within our own app as well. What's happening, in various different, areas, right, of the mobile device, but it's all anonymized data. So for us, we don't know that you are Joe Schmo. We see you as a random number in our system. And the only data that we get is if there is a malicious URL that is sent to you and you tap on it, we know what that malicious URL is. If there is a malicious app on your device and that malicious app is downloaded and installed, we know what the malicious app is. And, we understand the characteristics of what's happening on that device. So, from that standpoint, it's a really hard balance. And we see this all the time across all of our customers where they are trying to have that delicate, bridge between security, right? GFE plus MDM plus MTD, that's your secure world. Usability, right? Depending on how you want, folks to use their device, you may have just, an MTD at that point, right? And from a privacy standpoint, that's really going to be MTD or nothing, right? And that's where we have, other features such as like conditional access, where we can say, hey, your device is beyond a risk level that we see, beyond our tolerance level. So because of that, you can continue using your device. You just don't get access to corporate resources, right? And that's kind of our approach.
You limit people's accessibility of what they can use and how they can use it.
From a corporate perspective, right? So they can still look at, Facebook if they want. They can still look at, Instagram and whatever else they have installed. But if it's beyond the risk level that the organization seems to be tolerant of, then they don't get their email. They don't get their work applications. They don't get, whatever they use their device for work for, right? They can't open up files until that risk level is lowered. And then, great, we can grant that access again.
Again, this is all fascinating. We have about 5 minutes to go. And what I'd really like to hear from all of you is your look ahead at the future. So when you look at 2025 and beyond, what are the trends and forecasts in mobile security that government security leaders can't afford to ignore? Jonathan, can you go first?
It's going to be a continued race. We're going to look at the balance between security and usability to make sure people can do what they have to do. If we make it too difficult, they'll find ways around us. But we have to get more granular in the way we make our determinations and continue to keep that mission moving forward.
All right. Michael, did you have thoughts about what the future looks like and what government leaders can't really afford to ignore anymore in their mobile security?
Thank you. So that's part of what we try to do at PNNO. And so, of course, I believe more and more of the compute processing will move toward mobile devices, as it already has been. We've been discussing here today, right? Outside of AI systems, a lot of compute power going there as well, but also to the mobile devices, right? And people's personal information, meaning that that's a target-rich environment will continue to be even more of a target-rich environment, more enticing to attackers. AI ML advancements will be used to make attacks on devices and users more difficult to detect. I already mentioned that before. So we need to consider how to counter those by the use of AI and ML, right? So AI ML to fight AI ML. That's one thing that's definitely going to be on the rise. And connection speeds is another thing we haven't really talked about here. So as those go up with 5G and next G, what that really means from a security perspective oftentimes is that attacks can happen more quickly, can spread more quickly, and the damage can actually happen a lot more quickly. So it's something we have to keep an eye on, meaning the exfiltration of information, right? If you've got a super high speed connection, not only can you spread malware more quickly, but you can actually exfiltrate and do a lot more damage really quickly. So, and then supply chain considerations. I think those are going to be something that we start looking at more in the smartphone environment.
And do you think those ML AI applications or solutions that you're talking about are already in development? Have you seen anything that you're excited about?
We are beginning to definitely have a lot of AI ML work at PNNL, and we're specifically looking in the area of both cyber for AI, meaning protecting AI itself, and then AI for cyber, which is the latter. Is what we're kind of talking about here, is developing tools that can help us to automatically detect attacks and issues. So yeah, we're working in that area. A lot of other folks are working in that area too. So
okay, and then finally back to you, Jim. What does a strong mobile defense strategy look like?
Well, honestly, it's going to really come down to understanding, just needing an MDM, an MTD, and a strong policy, but also having strong leadership from everybody from top level executive groups all the way down to the individuals, and understanding the culture change that's needed to go along with this modernization of technology. Today we're moving at the speed of innovation. Even here at Lookout, we've been doing AI and machine learning for as long as we've almost been around. And in order to continue at the pace of what the attacker is doing, we are constantly having to think ahead about what's next. Is it going to be risk that people want to see? Is it going to be, better defense capabilities, better privacy? These are all things that we have to constantly keep on moving, on top of also staying on top of the adversary as well, right? So, I do think from a strategy standpoint that all needs to be there, but there also needs to be a strategy of what happens when there is a device that is compromised or an individual that is compromised. You have to understand who compromised them, who is the threat attack, or who is the threat actor. What were they trying to go after? Because when we start taking a look at groups like Scattered Spider and the possibility of violence as a service being involved, that's very different than, say, a nation state who is just simply trying to get access in order to get into their organization, right? Completely two different, risk profiles at that point in time. So there's a lot to honestly be considered. So bringing in your IR plans, having an understanding of your risk plans, going to be completely paramount to mobile strategy.
This is fascinating. I love this conversation. It is so forward thinking. And I thank you all for participating. Speakers, you have been terrific. Thank you much for your time today. And thank you all for tuning in. And remember to check out fedinsider.com for other fascinating topics just like this one. You'll learn something new every day at Fed Insider. Claudia Hosky, publisher of Fed Insider, will now come back and wrap things up for us today. Claudia?
Thanks, Jane. And thanks again to our speakers and to our audience. Thank you for your participation. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends. And remember to log back in the next day or two if you want to download a copy of our closed captioning transcript. As Jane mentioned, we have many webinars in the works. So be sure to visit fedinsider.com so you can see what's coming up and sign up for multiple webinars at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is Fed Insider signing off.